And thank you, Kenny, for inviting me. Can everyone, Noah Milandi, would you put your thumbs up if you can hear me? Fantastic. Okay, great. And the audio quality is reasonable.
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so here we are in slightly different circumstances. I was reminded of the difference that a year can make, because there was a bloke who walked into Tesco's in 2019, and in his Tesco's trolley there were 20 bottles of whiskey, and he insisted to the cashier that don't worry, he said, I'm not an alcoholic, I'm just having a party. In 2020, the same guy came to Tesco's with his trolley full of whiskey, 20 bottles as well, and he said, don't worry, to the cashier, don't worry, I'm not having a party, I'm just an alcoholic. So that's the difference that a year can make. I see you all got that. Good. So, anyone here good at darts? Darts. Do you ever watch the darts, Kenny?
Not very often. Not very often.
No. It's a very working class thing, which is why I watch it. And but recently, after Boris's latest restrictions, my wife purchased a world map, stuck it on our kitchen wall, and she gave me a dart, and she said, Johnny, throw this, and wherever it lands, that's where you're taking me on holiday when this pandemic ends. Turns out we're going to be spending 2 weeks behind the fridge. Anyway, enough of the comedy. After Yom Tov, there's a machlokas to be had. Some people call this month after Yom Tov Cheshvan, and some call it Mar Cheshvan. And Mar means bitter. Why is it bitter? Because there are no special occasions, there are no special mitzvahs or yomim tovim that occur during this month. And therefore it's called bitter because it's devoid of the kedusha of a Yom Tov or a Chag. Some people just say Cheshvan because it's not bitter, because not having any Yom Tovim to prepare for is a cause of celebration. So there's a machlokas, far be it from me to intervene. But what is the tachlis of this month? The bottom line is, according to both opinions, Cheshvan or Mar Cheshvan, there are no holidays during this month. And so what are we supposed to do with this month? You know, spiritually, what can we get out of this particular time? The original name for the month of Mar Cheshvan is Bull. Bull, yes, Bull. And that you'll find that in Malachim, the sixth parak of Sefer Malachim, it describes the month of Cheshvan as Bull. And that word may sound familiar when you look outside today. Because, Kenny? No, Mabul.
Oh, Mabul. Oh, bull. Yeah, of course.
So Bull comes from Mabul.
Yeah.
And if you look outside today, you know it's Parshas Noach coming up this Shabbos. It's always the clue that the Parsha affects the week. So as that Mabul goes on outside, hello everybody, as that Mabul goes on outside, you know that you're in the month of Bull. And that comes from Mabul, which means a torrential downpour and a flood. Now, if we look at the Parsha, and I wanted to share some ideas about the Parsha with you today. If we look at the Parsha, we know that Cheshvan, this month, whether it's bitter or not, is really a feature of the flood story and narrative. It's ironic that we read Parshas Noach by definition in the month of Cheshvan. But if you look at the details of the narration of the flood, Cheshvan, or Bull, is crucial. In the Pasuk, it says, Vahi ba'achas v'sheish me'ah shana. It came to pass in the 600th and, Barishon be'echad lachodesh, on the first day of the month, in the first month, the waters dried up. Hamayim, chorbu hamayim me'al ha'aretz, v'yosar Noach es michsei hateva. Noah removed the covering of the ark. and he saw Vayar v'hinei chorvu pnei ha'adama, and the surface of the ground had dried up. Then it says, "U'b'chodesh ha'sheni b'shiva v'esrim b'yom l'chodesh yoshva ha'oretz." In the second month, on the 27th of the month, the earth became dry. So if you look at Rashi on the Parsha about the chronology of this flood, he indicates the dates and the time periods in the Torah's account. And he says that you can see that on the 17th of Cheshvan, Noah enters the ark and the rains begin. And the waters receded the following year on the 27th of Cheshvan. So the flood began and ended in this month of Cheshvan. And after it ends, Noah and the other inhabitants disembark the ark. And interestingly, we know that this month is called Bull. So the flood begins and ends in this month. The original Hebrew name for this month, Cheshvan, is an Aramaic name, but the original Hebrew name for the month is Bull, which is etymologically derived from Mabul. So we see a connection, an intimate connection between this month, this time period, where there are no Yom Tovim, and the flood. So there's a connection, therefore, between having no Yom Tov, having a flood, and this particular month. They're intimately connected based on a very simple reading of the Parsha. So where is the mitzvah of the month? And what are we supposed to be focusing on and working on this month? The pasuk says, "Vayom Hashem LaNoach," God spoke to Noah, "Boi ato v'chol beisacho el hateva." Come you and all your household into the teva, which is tov, vase, hay, which means ark or box, teva. Ki ois chorisi tzaddik lafanai b'dor hazeh, because I've seen that you are the tzaddik in this generation. And the Zohar, based on that pasuk, when Noah was commanded by Hashem to enter him and his family into the ark, the Zohar says that is the mitzvah and the divine service of this month of Cheshvan. And it was not only given to Noah, but for all generations. Now, it's not an official mitzvah that you will find in the 630 mitzvahs and Sefer mitzvahs. What is this mitzvah? And how could it possibly apply to future generations that we are all commanded this month, in the month of Cheshvan, in the month of Bull, in the month of torrential downpours, in the month where the flood for Noah began and ended, the mitzvah is you and your family and your household enter the ark. How could that be transcendent? How could that transcend the time and place of the flood? So I wanted to explore that with you. Now, we know that words are important. And we know that in Elul and Tishrei, the months preceding Cheshvan, the words are offered in terms of teshuvah. We have to make a vidui before Hashem. We have to confess what we've done wrong and determine to change our lives and to change what we're going to do. We make a commitment to the future and we say to Hashem words of teshuvah. We remove obstructions, and teshuvah forms an incubative, a protecting shield, like an incubator over the sinner. So too, the teva of Noach was also a protective shield. Kenny, do you mind muting your device, because I'm just getting some feedback, if that's okay. Thanks, Kenny. So too, the teva of Noach, the Ark of Noah, was really a spiritual device. How do we know this? The Ramban Nachmanides writes that every boat maker, and I don't know if there's any boat makers at Raleigh Close, probably are, every boat maker knows by studying the dimensions of the Teva, Noah's Ark, that it was not fit for sailing. Why was it not fit for sailing? Well, the bottom was flat, which is not very good for the high seas. The dimensions were weirdly fastidious and disproportionate. It was a bit like a mishkan on the sea. It was a bit like a tabernacle floating on the sea. And all these measurements that it has and all the features of it and the sohar, the light or the light that came in, or the light was generated by some sort of supernatural rock, and all of these dimensions and details we learn about the Teva were superfluous if this thing was just a vehicle of transport or a submarine or I don't know, an obermarine. It wasn't just a boat. And therefore, the purpose of this Teva was not just to save the family and save humanity, because there are many other ways that God could have done this. I mean, he could have done anything, right? He could have, I don't know, put them on a magic carpet. And therefore, this Teva, this boat makes no sense in material terms. If you analyze it materially through the spectacles of Gashmias, it doesn't make much sense. Why it had to be a boat, it had to be this size, it had to be have a flat bottom. And what was it all about, this Teva? The Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, writing in Italy, says that the purpose of the Teva mainly was a Mabul for the torrential rain and the flood. But there is also a spiritual Mabul that was very prevalent at that time. We know that why did Hashem bring this Mabul? Because there was also a downpour of immorality in the world, interbreeding between different animals, other types of breeding, and other types of relationships, which today one cannot point out are wrong, unless one wants to be destroyed by, I guess, irreligious political correctness. But my morality has been given over to the Torah. So what I believe is right and wrong is not really what I made up. That I believe that we stood at Mount Sinai, we received morality. It wasn't a human invention. In fact, it goes against a lot of what we desire. We all want to cut corners and we all have desires to do all sorts of things. And this pesky Bible gets in the way. And therefore, Hashem has given us an absolute morality that was in an unprecedented experience at Mount Sinai, telling us what's right and wrong. Anyway, at that generation of Noah, lots of things were going wrong, according to the divine measurement of right and wrong. And there was a flood, but the world was full of tumah. The world was full of a downpour of tumah, of contamination or contamination. And therefore, there wasn't just a physical flood. In the world, there was a spiritual flood where life was being snuffed out by immorality. Because, you know, all the sexual immorality that was going on, that's the type of immorality which makes life impossible to thrive, right? Those relationships were the type where you don't have a next generation being born. Therefore, humanity would be stunted. There could be no life. And therefore, there was a spiritual flood, just like the flood would kill every animal apart from fish, I guess, or octopuses if they're a fish. So too, the spiritual contamination in the world amongst human beings was also threatening to life. So it destroyed everything apart from the Teva. Hashem revealed to Noach the mystery of the Teva and its design, that at the time of this Mar Cheshvan, or this Cheshvan month, the Teva is a protecting film that can protect us from the spiritual Mabul. It was a place of closeness to Hashem, where Noach and his family learnt about Chesed, learnt about how to take care of the animals, even if a lion's going to dislodge his hip, right? He had to learn how to be kind, and it protected him spiritually. And the Pasuk says, they came into the ark 2 by 2. This is what we sang at Aldrington County Primary School in Reading, before I knew that I had any religious Jewish affiliations. In my youth, at a non-Jewish school in Reading, where I went. We sang this song. The animals came in two by two, hurrah, hurrah, etc. I won't go. I won't. Was it the something in the kangaroo, and they all went into the ark just to get out of the rain. That was basically how the song went. That was the niggin of Washington County Primary School back in the late 1980s. So enough of that. But the point is, they went into the ark. They went into the ark, male and female, if there is such a thing as male and female. I don't know why we even point out that there is male and female. It should just be zinakeva. Anyway, I'm getting away with a lot here because I'm online and you can't answer me back. Anyway, Zocher Nakeva, they went into the ark, male and female. Mikol Bosa Boil Kaasha Tziva Israel Kim Yiska Hashem Ba'adoi. They went into the ark, and as Hashem had commanded them, and God closed off on account of Noah. Vayizgoy, like Sagur, like closing the door. God closed Noach off by using the teva as a protective incubator. So the mitzvah, as the commentaries tell us, that the Zohar said that every Cheshvan, for all of the generations, there is a mitzvah to take you and your family into the teva, like Noah did. And that is the mitzvah of the month, in a month where there are no Yomim Tovim. The mitzvah is forever to enter into the teva during this month, to bring our families not into a literal boat, but something that will protect, and to protect us from the tumah of the world, from the spiritual mabul, the spiritual downpour and flood, to be saved from that danger. How do we understand this? In the German Jewish community, there was a minhag that when they blessed the new month on Shabbos Mevorachim, they would bless the month on the Shabbat preceding Rosh Chodesh. They would sing the song of Yehi Rotzain and the Shabbos Mevorachim benching. They would sing the tune according to the theme of the month. So before Rosh Chodesh Adar, they would, when they said the blessing for the month, they used the tune of the laning for Megillas Esther. And this would happen every month. They would choose a tune that would, like, I guess, before Rosh Chodesh Kislev, they'd probably use a tune from Moed Sur for Hanukkah. And when they got to the month of Mar Cheshvan, the Yekas, the German Jewish community had a strong custom of saying the benching for the new month, to bless the new month, using the tune of Gemara learning. But what is the tune of Gemara learning? Amar Ravashi, Kamash Malon, Tati Mashma, whatever it would be. You know what I'm saying. That's the tune. La 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 la, da 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 la. Not a very tuneful tune, not very mellifluous or beautiful, but nevertheless a tune. And they would use that tune for inaugurating the month of Cheshvan. Why would they use that tune? I think it ties into what we're learning from the Zohar. When Hashem says, go into the teva, every generation must go into the teva. Teva also means word. Teva means word. Roshei Tevos, initials. Teva is not just a box or an ark, it also means a word. So why did they use the tune for the Gemara when they were benching the month of Cheshvan? Because the main mitzvah, or the main concept of this month, is going into your ark. And ark does not just mean ark, it means word. And what is the ultimate word? The Torah. Which means that especially in the 6th millennium, where we are today, which began in the Hebrew terms in 1850, the year 5000, or roundabout, when there was a technological and industrial revolution, when chokhmah and wisdom in medicine, in industry, in, I guess, personal technology, that really lifted and advanced exponentially from around 1850 until today. And only our Torah learning would flourish in those years because the Torah's depths would be revealed during this time in order to deal with the flood of tumor in the world. Now you can get anything at the click of a button, and only the word, the teva, the protective film, the incubator of the Torah's words can protect us. Contamination in the world. We live in Mabul times, and we are the exponents of the Mabul. Harvey Weinstein, Hollywood, there are quite a few of our people involved in lots of things where Jewish values are pretty much non-existent. And when you go to the movies, as I do, and I recently watched 1917 by Sam Mendes, also story of the First World War, but there are a lot of movies that are not inspiring. They are, they are antithetical to inspiring. And that's also a virus that's catching, not just the coronavirus or COVID-19. Also, this contamination, the tumor of the world, the spiritual downpour, the flood of 2020 is also catching. And so just like you can catch a physical virus, you can catch a spiritual one too. And therefore, with many people drowning, the mitzvah of the month is to go into the teva. Go you and your families into the teva. Go into the word. Go into the learning of Torah. Not to impress people, not for show, but for honest interrogation and investigation into your Jewish identity and heritage. Enter into it, you and your family, even if it's just a single letter. Teva means also a letter. Even if it's just one word or one letter. And that's why the German community sang the benching of the month in the nigun of the learning of Gemara, because the main mitzvah we can do in this month of Mar Cheshvan is to delve into the Torah. That is our ark. We don't have a physical ark like Noah did, but we have the ark of Torah. We have the word, the teva, which means word. We have that incubator, which can inform us, inspire us, and protect us from the mabul that we have today, which is not just the inclement weather in Hendon and Radlett today, but the spiritual downpour that we need protecting from. And we should take the teva seriously. And your entire being has to go into that on some level. Ayla told us Noach. Next point. So we've covered the first point, which was, what are we supposed to be doing in this month for no Yom Tovim? By the way, have you heard of Kovod Yom Tov? Kovod Yom Tov, I'm sure you've heard him really close. COVID-19, 19 is Yud Tes, Rosh Tevas Yom Tov, Kovod Yom Tov. Anyway, we're just putting that out there for your own titillation. These are the generations of Noach. Ayla told us Noach ish tzadik haya tomim haya b'doy roisav es elikim hisalech Noach. These are the generations of Noah. Noach was a righteous man. He was perfect in his generations. He walked with God. Rashi says, Yesh doshim l'shvach v'yesh doshim l'ganai. Some explain that when it contextualizes Noah's righteousness in terms of his generation, he was perfect in his generation. Some explain that's a positive statement, that Noah, the Torah is telling us that Noach would have been even greater had he been around Avraham Avinu and inspiring leaders like that. But even in a generation of a downpour of tumor and contamination and immorality, he was still a tzaddik. But some interpret this as a negative, as we know, that saying that he was righteous in his generations, that Noach was great only because those around him were so bad, the bar was set so low, that of course he was righteous. But if he'd have been in a better generation, he would have been a nothing. So many ask, if it's possible to interpret this verse in a way which gives credit to Noach, why darshan it? Why expound it in a way which reflects badly on him? It's a bit like Sadio Mane being called offside against Everton in the Merseyside derby, because when Thiago threaded the ball through, the VAR check showed he was level with the defender. There wasn't one hair on his body that was offside, as I'm sure you saw. And they didn't give the advantage to the attacking team. If you could interpret this posuk positively for Noach or negatively, it's pretty much level. You can interpret both. It's a sort of 50-50. Give him the benefit of the doubt, like Sadio Mane lahavdil. Anyway, I'm just getting that out of my system. Anyway, so why darshan the posuk negatively if you could darshan it positively? So it must be that those who darshan the Ganai, those who expound this verse negatively, that Noah was only a tzaddik because he was around spiritual minnows, but in a great generation he would have been a nothing. Why are they saying that? It must be trying to teach us a profound lesson as well. What's the profound lesson? The answer is, obviously Hashem will save a perfect tzaddik. Obviously Hashem will save the best of the best. The chidush, the novelty of our parsha and the story of Noach is that Hashem will rescue even a flawed tzaddik, even someone who's only a tzaddik b'deirosov, even someone who's only righteous in his generation only. He compares well to very low people. Nevertheless, the whole of humanity was saved because of him. And we know there's a pasuk in Koheles, there's a verse in Ecclesiastes. Ki Adam ein tzaddik ba'aretz asher ya'aseh tov v'lo yechato. We say this at the Lavoya. There is no person on earth who only does good and never sins. There is no righteous person on earth who only does good and never sins. Meaning, you can be a tzaddik in Shemayim. You can be a tzaddik in the Himalayas. But can you be a tzaddik on earth? There is no righteous person on earth, meaning living in the mundane world, who only does good and never sins. So Hashem doesn't expect us to be perfect. And he didn't expect Noach to be perfect. But even someone who's flawed, even when the rabbis say, yeah, he was only great in his generation, in a better generation, he would have been nothing. But that's actually a compliment. And it's actually a revelation that even for someone who wasn't that great, those who interpret the posuk negatively for Noach are teaching us a profound lesson that even for a flawed tzaddik, the world was saved. God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the cattle that were with him in the ark, and God caused the Spirit to pass over the earth and the waters subsided. In reality, had it not been for Noah, it sounds like the flood would have continued for much longer, maybe indefinitely. But Hashem remembered Noach, by Yizkor Elokim es Noach, and as a result of one flawed individual, one flawed tzaddik, the flood stopped for the entire world. Rav Reuben Katz was a rabbi in Europe. He spoke on Rosh Hashanah 1916. And I mentioned 1917 earlier in this year, but 1916, there was a shortage of food and danger on all sides in World War I, which was then raging. And Rabbi Reuben Katz, to his followers and his congregation, chose as his theme for his sermon on Rosh Hashanah 1916 this verse, Vayizkor Elokim es Noach, God remembered Noah, which, by the way, we mention in Musaf on Rosh Hashanah. God remembered Noach. What can we do to change things when there is global turmoil and upheaval, as there is today in 2020? The answer is that we can change ourselves. One tzaddik, one individual, flawed as we may be, is enough to cause Hashem to stop an entire Mabul, which killed everything in the world, which suffocated all life, maybe apart from the fish. But who knows? Maybe some of them, there is some midrashim that says that the Mabul was also boiling hot. So I'm not sure how many fish would survive. But Hashem stopped a whole Mabul for that person, for Noach and what he represented, even though he was totally flawed. So there's one individual that could cause the whole of this pandemic to end, or a war, even if no one else deserves it. If everyone didn't have the merit, but one person did, that would be enough. Dayenu, to save the world. So I think that this particular parasha of Noach can give us chizuk and much needed encouragement. That if we can focus on our teva, going into the words of Torah, going into the incubator of the teva, of understanding the Zohar, that's our particular divine service of the month, even in the month of no Yom Tov, apart from COVID Yom Tov. There's no Yom Tov, there's no mitzvah, but there is a mitzvah to go into the teva, explore the Torah, even if it's just one word. Because even if you're not a tzaddik and you're flawed, so was Noah, and the world was saved just for him. So too, anything can stop the Mabul. Any person, one individual can stop the Mabul, even if no one else deserves it. And we must also remember one more thing. Eila told us Noach, these are the progeny of Noah. Answer, you would have thought, Shem, Chom, Yofes. You had 3 sons. Get on with telling them that already. These are the children of Noah. Tell me the children of Noah. But the Torah does not do that. Torah says, these are the generations of Noach, Ish Tzaddik, etc. The progeny of Noah is Noah. The kid of Noah is Noah. What does that mean? And our sages tell us a person's main productivity is measured by how one shapes or molds oneself. Noach's progeny was Noach himself. He did this not only by being a tzaddik, but also with his interpersonal skills and standards. Tomim Hoya B'Doyroisav. He wasn't just a tzaddik in terms of man to God. He was a tzaddik in terms of his interpersonal integrity. Tomim Hoya B'Doyroisav. He was perfect. He was Tomim. He was wholesome with his generations, with his people. And therefore, the rabbis conclude and say, more central to achievement than biological children even are a person's good deeds. Noach was, what the person Noach became was the main productivity of Noah. What he produced was a new Noach who was on a higher level. And that's measured by good deeds and ethical standards. And therefore, he was his greatest creation. And therefore, we learn from that the little things that we do, the small acts of kindness that we do, the acts of self-sacrifice, going out of our comfort zone and going into the ark on whatever level that may be, that is what defines our real achievement in our lives. And therefore, that's another place to pause in terms of the parasha. So we've learned 3 things now from the parasha, which you can take home with you go tell it on the mountain. Number 1, the essence of this month, the connection to the flood, Bull, Cheshvan. That's when the flood started and ended. The fact that the mitzvah of the month, according to the Zohar, comes from the verse where Noach is told to enter the teva. What does it mean to enter the teva? Well, it's not entering into teshuva. We've done that already. But Mar Cheshvan is the month where we delve into the teva, the spiritual incubator of the Torah, which can save us from the torrential downpour of our own mabul in our own generation. And secondly, that what does it mean to say that Noach was only a tzaddik in his lowly generation, but he wasn't much when he compared to the greats. Why, what's the point of saying that when you've got the opportunity to be done the chafschus and to give him the benefit of the doubt and interpret the verse well, and to his credit, well, it's teaching us, as I said, that it's telling us even someone who's flawed, the world can be saved for. There's no righteous person on earth who does good and never sins, and yet that saved the whole of the world. And we explored World War One and the famous drasha of 1916 of Rabbi Reuben Katz, who talked about this idea: one tzaddik can stop the war. And so we extrapolated: one person can end the virus. Hashem can act vis-a-vis the whole of humanity based on the actions of one flawed individual. And the third lesson was that Noah was his greatest creation. Elah told us Noach, he was his own greatest creation, because our good deeds and what he did with his life and the way he developed personally was greater spiritually than even biological children. And therefore the narrative pauses. Elah told us Noach, and then later it tells us Shem Cham v'Yafes, his three sons, because the main progeny of a person are their good deeds. Now, to conclude, I wanted to say that I don't know how it's going in Raleigh Close, but across the United Synagogue, one of the unexpected, unintended consequences of government intervention in terms of restrictions is a disengagement from Yiddishkeit, a disengagement from shul life, which is understandable and only natural in the circumstances. But what we must focus on is that when the downpour is over, and when the flood waters have subsided, and when we get out of the ark, what are we left with? We need to fortify ourselves and prepare now for that eventuality. Many people have got out of the custom and the habit of going to shul, of going to shiurim. Thanks to Kenny and his team, Toshima continues to reach out. And there are many programs that reach out, but obviously there's nothing like being there. You can't learn as much without it being an immersive face-to-face experience. You can't really pray as well if you're not surrounded by a community that are pouring out their hearts for whatever they need. And in that room, you have people who are praying for children, people who are praying for Refuah Shalema, people who are praying for their grandparents, their parents, their children. You don't get that on your own. Your prayers in a shul are accompanied by the petitions and the heartfelt cry of people in all sorts of situations. And you don't have that by yourself. And I believe wholeheartedly in the preventative measures. We stay separate now so that when we get together again, no one is missing. But we have to fortify ourselves up. When we get out of the table, we step out of the ark, what's left? And we need to start preparing and psychologically motivating ourselves and psyching ourselves up for the return. And even though that may seem a little bit far off at the moment, it is something we need to focus on, and particularly in the United Synagogue, because maybe not in Hendon, because it's on the more religious end of the spectrum within the United Synagogue. But in the wider world, in the wider family of shuls, when people's commitment may not be 100% to begin with, and these situations that we're in now are chipping away at that commitment even more, now is the time in our own way. And even if it's just one individual, as we said, the individual's decisions and actions can be life-saving for the whole world, as Noah's was. But each individually to fortify ourselves and recommit that when we step out of that table, that when we go onto dry land at the end of the flood or at the end of the plague, at the end of this pandemic, that we will be ready to re-enter with renewed vigor into a passionate connection with our Jewish heritage and Yiddishkeit. That is a big test at this time. So there's a refrain to be said in terms of this analogy of the ark. So I wanted to share a couple of jokes with you, 3 ideas about the parasha of this week's parasha, and then to make a statement regarding where we are in this point of history, in the epoch of the pandemic, and what we can do now in this month of Cheshvan, and what we can do generally to strengthen ourselves during this time. And I'm happy to take any questions. I'm not sure what the expectations are in terms of timing, but certainly I'm happy to spend 10 minutes now. If anyone has any things to ask, I'd be more than grateful. But on that note, the case rests. Thank you for having me, and over to you, Kenny. Thank you.
Could we not criticize Noah because he didn't actually actively go out and try to encourage people to save themselves by, changing their attitudes? Abraham went out. Why didn't Noah go out? What was it that prevented him doing anything? Did he not realize that, he should be active rather than passive?
You can argue he was active. He was there building this ark for 120 years. It's quite a long time to be in the building trade. And everyone asked him, why are you building the ark? And he said, because a flood's coming. It's going to wipe out humanity because humanity has become corrupt. Not many people listened. And so there's a school of thought that Noach was not in his nature as outreaching as Abraham was. But nevertheless, he did in his own way, in his own quiet, introverted way, warn the generation. And they had every chance. They had every chance of taking him seriously. There are 2 different personality types, extrovert and introvert, that maybe Noach's, his nature, his God-given nature, was more focused on his immediate surroundings, himself, his family. And there are 2 philosophies in the world. There are the outreach organizations within the world and within our own faith. Yeah, people who put tefillin on you in Timbuktu, or organizations that will take kids to inspiring trips in Israel, and actively try to change hearts and minds to become more religious or more likely to marry in, or whatever the targets are. But there's another school of thought, a school of thought adopted by the more yeshivish world, which is, if a man in Hendon, if a woman in Antwerp does a mitzvah, learns Torah, then someone in Timbuktu becomes frum. Meaning there are ramifications, spiritual reverberations, based on what we do in our own lives that don't require us to go actively and do kiruv, but your own personal conduct has an effect in the world. And the learning that goes on in the yeshiva can impact the whole community, or even beyond. So you could say that either Noah's personality was of that nature. You could argue that he built the ark of 120 years, he warned people. Or you could say that the school of philosophy he ascribed to was more the yeshivish school of, my conduct will have an impact, and I don't need to abandon my calling in order to go and preach in an Abrahamic way. So those are, I think, 3 ways you can address your question.
Surely, though, if the message is put out, if Noah put a message out, it's also up to people to do what they want with that message. In other words, accept it or reject it. There's always that.
Absolutely. So, Ronnie, you mean that Noah's neighbors have to take some sort of responsibility for not heeding his warning. Is that what you mean?
For not taking notice of what he was saying by building the ark.
Yeah, they didn't heed the warning.
Can't just blame him.
You can't just blame him. No. There is a statement in the Talmud that says, "Kol harotze litos yova v'yiteh." Derech shel adam reitzeh lelech melichin osei. The derech, the path the person wishes to follow, God allows his angels and ministering celestial helpers to open the door for that person to carry on their path of destruction. Meaning, if you really want to do something wrong, God says, I'm opening the door for you. So there's an idea, a concept that we create our own destiny by our bad choices, and that we have to take responsibility. We're not like Adam Harishon pre-hate. We're not like Adam before the sin, where he didn't have any temptation. He was just a robot, did everything like he was supposed to do. We are Adam post-sin, and we have now accountability. If we don't heed the cry, if we don't listen to the warning, if we ignore what's around us, then we're personally responsible for that. And that's our free will. So we can't blame Noah entirely. So that's a good point, Ronnie. Would anyone else like to say something?
Which school do you subscribe to as far as Noah is concerned? Do you follow the view that he's to be condemned for not doing more, or he did his best?
I like Noah, actually. I find that he is the quiet hero. He is the understated hero. I tend to expound it to his praise, because Sviva is everything. If you're in a bad environment, if you're in a world where everyone is raping and killing and destroying the world constantly, and you don't give in to your environment, then that is truly heroic. It may be you don't reach the exalted levels of someone who is surrounded by angels, tzaddikim, righteous people, but you're in the favela in Brazil, surrounded by people like Luis Suarez in his youth, right? Scrapping for survival. And you stay clean. You might argue that is an even greater achievement. That that Noach did not get influenced by his surroundings as much as others would. And therefore he withstood the downpour. And that's an act of heroism that he had to his credit. So I subscribe to those who say he was great in his generations, and he would have been even greater in surrounded by tzaddikim. On the other hand, you find exceptions to this. You can have a frum family, or the black sheep of the family, where one goes off the derech. You can have people in a completely secular family, and one of the kids becomes mega frum. You never know really how much your environment. I guess it is determinative in the majority of cases. Most people follow the derech of their parents. Most people follow what they were brought up to follow. But some people, the minority of people, totally rebel against their background, totally rebel against what the expectations were for them. Noach was one of them. He stood firm in a world of corruption, and therefore he's to be praised for that. Thank you, Kenny. Does anyone else have any questions? They could either write them or say them, but I don't want to hold you up.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. I wonder why this month is calling Mar Cheshvan. What's the reason?
Well, yeah, as I mentioned, Mar, the merirut, bitterness. Lama chodesh hazeh mar? Why is this month bitter? Bishvil she'ein bo yomim tovim. Ein chag b'mar cheshvan. לפי זה, כל החודש זה בטעם מר. בשביל שאין בה Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. There's no festival in this month. It's bereft. There is no Chag. So it's Mar Cheshvan. That's the theory.
Rabbi Hughes,
Yes.
one thing I like to point out, especially when you go towards the end of the Parsha, Noach, however good he was in the beginning, he lost it. And then subsequently there's very little mention of him after when he got shikha and he got out. And so you could argue, according to the second pshat of Rashi, to say that compared to Avraham Avinu, who wasn't a tzaddik, maybe that's the reason.
Well, if you look at the context of the pasuk that says tzaddik tomim hayad b'dei roisav, it's talking. I'm not sure if it's which point of Noach's life is that commentary being made. Is it being made pre-flood or post-flood? I mean, it hasn't told us the story of the flood yet when it says that about him. So at that stage, he was a tzaddik in his generation. Subsequently, he came out of the flood and he had a fall. But does that define his whole life? He was very old by that stage. He had a lot of years on this planet before that. The majority of his years were righteous, but he did fall. Why exactly he fell at that time, what it meant, what happened, is quite mysterious. If you want to use his end, the final chapter of his life to define the entire novel, then I think it would be quite harsh. Because if someone has done so much good and then at the end makes an error, maybe even a big error, he still saved the world. We're all here today because of him. It's a bit like rabbis who fall. It's a bit like rabbis who have scandals. It could be even B'Sof Yomov. It could be at the end of one's life. Or like, Lahavdil, Jimmy Savile, right? He was a Rosha throughout his life. But let's say the tale was slightly different, that he did all those things at the end of his life, and the rest of his life he was giving out presents to kids in hospitals, let's say that was the case, hypothetically speaking. Or if you have a rabbi who did so much good and helped so many people and then had a failing, is that person in God's eyes totally evil? Or is that person a flawed individual who has contradictions and has a lot of good and some bad, and will be judged by Hashem accordingly? But are they defined by are they defined by that could they be called Russia because of that episode? So if one episode was bad, does that destroy everything? Well, I would argue in Noach's case, since he achieved his goal, he saved the world, and generations came from. The Torah describes him as a tzaddik. The Torah says, Tomim ha'b'derosav, he was perfect in his generations, and the Torah knows what's going to happen. So you could say the Torah is even conscious of what would happen at the end of Noach's life, yet it still, ab initio, defines him as a tzaddik and tomim. So it seems that on balance, he can be criticized for what he did, but he still had an elevated level. But definitely we can agree that he had a mixed life, and his record. There are a few points on his license, let's put it that way, but he's still permitted to drive.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Are there any further questions? If not, then I will bid you adieu and hope you have a great day. Thank you, Kenny.
Thank you.
And hope to see you all soon. All the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Rabbi, from Pam
problem.
Allen.
Good to
Thank
see
you,
you.
Rabbi.
Same here.
See you.
Thank you, Shikar.
No problem. Bye for now.
Bye.
Leave.
Jack. Oh, he's gone now. He's gone. He's gone. Gone. Have a good day with a fortnight. Turn off. Here, when we use the meeting.